Welcome to Rene's Romance Stories, the woman who smiled when she won. I smiled when he chose me. Not a sweet smile, not a shy one. A clean, practiced smile, sharp at the edges, like it had been waiting in my mouth for years. That's how I knew I was already in trouble. Because winning isn't supposed to feel like you're stepping onto thin ice. But there I was, standing beside Julian in the center of the pack hall while the cameras drank in every angle of our faces, every twitch of emotion, every little proof that power had moved hands. And somewhere out there, somewhere in the crowd I refused to look at, was Alara, my best friend, my sister when it suited me, the girl who braided my hair before ceremonies and stayed up late translating Julian's council notes when his temper made him sloppy. The girl who loved like it was a job she never clocked out of. I didn't plan to take her life. I just noticed one day that it was available. If you've ever wanted something so badly, you convinced yourself it was fate. Stay with me. Because the problem wasn't that I betrayed her. The problem was that the pack applauded. And the moment the applause started, I realized something I didn't want to know. This wasn't the end of Alara's story. It was the beginning of mine. And mine was going to cost me. Chapter 1. The first lie I told myself. People think the trail starts with a kiss, or a secret meeting, or a hand lingering too long. They like it simple. They like villains with clean beginnings. But betrayal, real betrayal, starts with a sentence you tell yourself when you should have told the truth. Mine was this: I can want him and still be a good friend. It sounds harmless, doesn't it? Like the kind of thought you shrug off while you're doing something normal, washing dishes, sorting papers, brushing your teeth. Except I didn't shrug it off. I built a home in it. I've known Alara since we were girls. We grew up in the same pack territory, same stone streets, same winter winds that always smelled like pine and old secrets. Alara was the steady one, always the person you handed your problems to because she'd carry them without complaining. She was kindness with a backbone. Me? I was the one who made people laugh. The one who could walk into a tense room and make it loosen by sheer force of personality. The one elders described as spirited, which is adult language for hard to control. Alara used to call me her hurricane. "You keep life interesting," she'd say, smiling like she meant it. I did, just not in the way she deserved. Julian was part of our world like the mountains were, always there, unavoidable, quietly intimidating, even before he had the power to match his ego. He wasn't kind, not naturally, but he was charismatic in the ways storms are, beautiful if you're watching from a safe distance. Alara never watched from a distance. She stood beside him and called it love. When they announced their chosen bond years ago, the pack loved them. Modern romance, they called it. Proof we're evolving. I clapped. I cheered. I hugged Alara so hard she laughed and told me I was crushing her ribs. And I meant it when I said I was happy for her. That's what makes this story disgusting. Because I wasn't lying at first. The first time I noticed Julian looking at me differently, it wasn't romantic. It wasn't even flattering. It was curious. Like he'd just realized I existed outside my role as Alara's shadow. We were leaving a council meeting. Alara had stayed behind to translate an elder's objections into language Julian wouldn't turn into a fight. I waited outside, leaning against the stone wall, bored enough to count the cracks. Julian stepped out alone. His jaw was tight, His hands were clenched. He looked like he wanted to bite something. Then his gaze landed on me. Not through me, not past me, on me. "You're still here," he said. "I live here," I replied. "You should try noticing people more. It makes you less terrifying." His mouth twitched, like he didn't know whether to laugh or punish me for daring. "Ilara shouldn't have to fix every conversation you ruin," I added. There it was. The truth I always said aloud, because Ilara never wanted to. She hated conflict. I never minded it. Julian stared at me for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, "She chooses to." I should have walked away right then, but something in me, a part I didn't want to name, leaned forward instead. "Well," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "Some people choose storms, too. Doesn't mean they're good for them." His gaze sharpened, and for the first time, I saw it. Not admiration, not love. Need.
Julian needed control the way others needed air. He needed a room that didn't challenge him, until it did. And Ilara, sweet Ilara, had built herself into a cushion around his rough edges. I wasn't a cushion. I was a match. That's the moment the thought came. Small, sinful, seductive. He'd notice me more if I were the one beside him. I told myself it was just ego. Everyone has moments of vanity. Everyone wonders what it would feel like to be chosen. But vanity doesn't usually follow you home. It doesn't usually sit with you at night while you listen to your best friend talk about her future like it's safe. Ilara came over later with tea and a notebook full of council notes. She dropped them on my table and groaned. "I swear Julian enjoys making things harder than they need to be," she muttered. I snorted. Of course he does. If life was easy, how would he prove he's in charge? Ilara smiled tiredly and leaned her head on my shoulder. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she said softly. Something inside me tightened. Guilt, maybe. Or hunger. I don't know. That's the thing about early betrayal. It hides under emotions you already recognize. "I'm not going anywhere," I told her. And I meant it. Just not the way she thought. Later, when she left, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the empty mug she'd used. And the lie returned, gentle as a hand on my cheek. You can want him and still be her friend. I believed it because believing it meant I didn't have to change. And deep down, I already knew this about myself. I wasn't afraid of losing Julian. I was afraid of going back to being unseen. So I made another choice. Quiet. Invisible. Just for me. I didn't touch him. I didn't cross lines. Not yet. I simply started paying attention. And once you start watching a crack in a wall, you notice how quickly it spreads. Chapter 2. Watching her build what I wanted. Jealousy doesn't announce itself. It doesn't kick the door in and confess. It sits down quietly and starts taking notes. I noticed it first in the margins of Ilara's life. The way she stayed late after council meetings, sleeves rolled up, rewriting arguments Julian had mangled with his temper. The way elders softened when she spoke, even when she was telling them no. The way the pack leaned toward her without realizing they were doing it. She never asked for authority. That was the problem. I told myself I admired her for that I respected her restraint, that if the world were fair, she'd already be Luna. But the world doesn't reward restraint. It rewards visibility. And Ilara was invisible by design. I started noticing how often Julian deferred to her in private, then ignored her in public.
how he'd snap at elders and then calm down the moment she touched his arm. How she'd absorb his moods like weather, never complaining, never pushing back. She made him palatable. And I hated myself for thinking this, but I didn't want to be palatable. I wanted to be undeniable. There's a difference between supporting power and being power. Ilara didn't seem to mind which one she was, and that made it worse. Because if she'd wanted more, if she'd demanded space, demanded recognition, then wanting what she had would have felt less like theft and more like competition. Instead, it felt like coveting something sacred. So I justified. I told myself Ilara chose this, that if she was tired, she should speak up, that martyrdom wasn't nobility, it was avoidance. That was lie number 2. The truth was simpler and uglier. I resented how easily she carried what exhausted me just to witness. I started inserting myself more. Nothing obvious, just present. When Julian snapped at an elder, I'd laugh it off. When tensions rose, I'd redirect with humor. When Ilara stayed behind to clean up, I'd walk Julian out first. I told myself I was helping. Sometimes I even believed it. Julian noticed. Not all at once. Gradually. Like a man realizing the room felt different when the furniture shifted. "You're not afraid of me," he said once, almost accusingly. We were standing outside the council chamber again. Ilara was inside, bent over papers, translating compromise into something Julian would accept without feeling small. "Should I be?" I asked lightly. Most people softened their voices around him. I never had. It wasn't bravery, it was instinct. I didn't like shrinking, even for powerful men. He studied me for a long moment. "Most people are." "Most people confuse fear with respect," I replied. "They're not the same thing." That earned me a look I felt in my bones. And there it was, that spark people write songs about. Except sparks don't care what they burn down. I went home that night and sat on my bed, staring at the wall, shame crawling up my spine. This was wrong. Ilara trusted me. She told me things she didn't tell anyone else, her doubts, her exhaustion, the quiet fear that one day Julian would wake up and decide she wasn't enough. I should have reassured her. Instead, part of me thought, what if he already has? That thought disgusted me. So I doubled down on being her friend. I showed up with food when she forgot to eat. I defended her when elders dismissed her work. I listened when she vented, nodding in all the right places. And every time I did, the justification grew stronger. If I'm still here for her, I can't be that bad. That's how self-justification works. It doesn't erase the crime. It balances it. The worst moment came quietly. Ilara and I were sitting on the floor of her room, backs against the bed, surrounded by papers. Julian had stormed out earlier, furious over a council vote that didn't go his way.
"I don't know how much longer I can keep smoothing things over," she admitted softly. "Sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing behind him." I should have told her she mattered. Instead, I said, "Maybe he needs someone who pushes back." She frowned slightly. "Like you?" The question was innocent. My answer wasn't. "Maybe," I said. The word hung between us like smoke. Ilara didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and she chose not to. That's the thing about people like Ilara. They assume the best because imagining the worst hurts too much. I went home that night and didn't sleep. Because somewhere between shame and longing, I realized the truth I'd been circling for weeks.
I didn't just want Julian. I wanted the space Ilara occupied in the world. The authority without spectacle. The closeness without begging. The way the pack trusted her without demanding proof. And the most damning realization of all? If she stepped aside, I wouldn't have to take anything. I could just fill the space. That's when jealousy stopped being a feeling and became a plan. Even if I was still pretending, I didn't know it yet. Chapter 3. The day the smile became permanent. The morning it happened, I woke up calm. That should have scared me more than panic ever could. I dressed carefully. Not beautifully, carefully. Neutral colors, nothing loud. Nothing that looked like ambition. I wanted to look inevitable, not hungry. Power hates desperation. It loves inevitability. Ilara knocked on my door just after sunrise, already dressed, already tired. "Big day," she said, forcing a smile. "For Julian," I replied. She laughed softly, the way people do when they don't want to correct you, even though you're wrong. "For all of us, I guess." I watched her as she spoke, really watched her. The faint shadows under her eyes, the way she rolled her shoulders like she was bracing for impact. She didn't know what was coming, and that knowledge sat in my chest like a stone. If this were a story about a villain, this would be the moment I confessed to feeling sick, or conflicted, or racked with remorse. I felt steady. That was the most damning part. We walked to the pack hall together, side by side, familiar as ever. Anyone watching would have thought nothing had changed. I let her talk. I nodded in the right places. I even reached for her hand once, squeezing it when her voice wavered. I don't know why I did that. Maybe part of me wanted to be able to say later that I'd been kind. The pack hall buzzed with anticipation. Cameras lined the walls, discreet but present. This wasn't just an announcement. It was a broadcast, a statement. Julian stood at the front, already in position, shoulders squared, expression composed in that way he practiced in mirrors. He didn't look at Ilara, not once. I felt it then, a flicker of unease. Not guilt, recognition. This wasn't a decision being made. It had already been made. Julian cleared his throat, and the room quieted like it always did for him. Power has a way of teaching people when to stop breathing. "Thank you all for gathering," he began. Ilara straightened beside me, anticipation tightening her posture. I saw the exact moment she expected to hear her name. I also saw the moment she didn't. Julian's hand moved, not toward Ilara, toward me. I don't remember deciding to take it. I remember my fingers closing around his like they'd rehearsed this without my permission. The room inhaled. Julian's voice didn't waver. "Today, I'm announcing a necessary change." Necessary. Such a clean word for destruction. "Ilara has served this pack with dedication," he continued, eyes fixed forward. "But the future requires strength aligned with vision." I stared straight ahead. I didn't look at her. I told myself it was mercy. "I choose Maris," he said. The sound that followed wasn't gasps. It was applause. Polite at first, then louder. Approval rippling outward as people recalibrated in real time, rewriting loyalty on the fly. I smiled. I couldn't stop it. My face did what it had been trained to do my entire life: perform. The smile settled in, steady and convincing. The kind of smile you wear when you've crossed a line and need the world to believe you belong on the other side of it. I felt Alara next to me falter. Not collapse, not cry. Just empty out. If I had looked at her then, I might have broken. So I didn't. Julian spoke about bonds and futures and progress. Papers appeared. Formalities unfolded with brutal efficiency. Someone handed him the rejection document. Someone handed it to her. I saw her hands tremble when she took it. I saw her jaw tighten. I kept smiling. The necklace at my throat, her necklace, felt suddenly heavier, like it knew it had changed ownership in the ugliest way possible. The applause came again at the end. That's when I knew I could never undo this, because applause doesn't just approve, it absolves. By the time Alara fell, someone else was already moving to catch her. Not Julian. I noticed that too. I noticed everything. Later, after the hall emptied, after the cameras shut off, after the pack had collectively decided this was acceptable, I stood alone in a side corridor and pressed my hand to my mouth. My face hurt. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding that smile. Julian found me there minutes later, eyes bright, restless, victorious. "It worked," he said. I nodded. Yes, I agreed. It had. That night, alone in my room, I stood in front of the mirror and studied myself like a stranger. The smile was still there, permanent. I touched it carefully, like it might crack. That was the first time the thought surfaced, uninvited, unwelcome, undeniable. Winning shouldn't feel like this. But it was too late to ask why. Because the woman who smiled when she won doesn't get to pretend she didn't know the cost. Chapter 4. What winning actually looks like. The silence after victory is louder than defeat. I learned that on the first night I slept in Alara's space. Not her room exactly, but the role she'd occupied so completely that the pack had forgotten it was ever hers. Julian's quarters were larger than mine had been, warmer, designed for authority rather than comfort. I lay beside him on a bed that smelled faintly of stone and cedar and something unsettled beneath it all. He didn't touch me right away. That should have been my first warning. "You handled today well," he said eventually, staring at the ceiling. Not we, not us. I turned my head slightly, studying his profile. "You sound surprised." "I am," he replied honestly. "Most people would have broken under that kind of attention." There it was, the compliment edged with control. I smiled again, smaller this time, tired. "You didn't give me much choice." He glanced at me then, something unreadable flickering across his face. "Power doesn't wait for comfort." That sentence should have thrilled me. Instead, it landed wrong, heavy, impersonal, like I'd just been promoted into a job that never ends. Julian rolled toward me, finally pulling me close. His arm was warm, solid, familiar in a way that didn't quite belong to me yet. The intimacy felt practiced, like he was repeating a motion he knew by heart, muscle memory built with someone else. I didn't say that out loud. I told myself, adjustment takes time. That night, when he fell asleep quickly, too quickly, I lay awake, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of a man who had already moved on emotionally. From Alara. From me. In the morning, the pack bowed. Not deeply, not reverently, but they bowed. I returned their greetings with nods and polite smiles, slipping into the role the way I'd always slipped into rooms: adaptable, observant, alert. I expected the thrill to come then, the rush of validation. Instead, I felt watched, not admired, measured. The elders addressed Julian. I stood beside him like punctuation. No one asked for my opinion. No one asked for Ilara's either, but somehow that felt different. Ilara's influence used to hum in these halls, quiet, unquestioned, like gravity. Mine had to announce itself. I compensated. I spoke more, laughed louder, inserted myself where silence threatened to swallow me whole. When an elder questioned Julian's decision, I answered before he could. Julian didn't stop me. That felt like permission. By midday, whispers followed me. Not admiration, but assessment. She's ambitious. She's sharp. She won't be easy to manage. None of them said Luna. I told myself, titles take time. That evening, Julian snapped at a guard for a minor mistake. Ilara would have soothed him before it escalated, redirected his anger into something productive. I didn't. Then replace him, I said sharply once the guard fled. Fear doesn't make people loyal. It makes them sloppy. Julian stared at me, something cold flickering in his eyes. You don't tell me how to lead, he said quietly. The words hit harder than shouting. I forced a laugh. Then don't make mistakes that need correcting. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Julian turned away. You wanted this position, he said. Use it wisely. That wasn't partnership. That was warning. Later, alone again, I stood at the window overlooking the territory Ilara had once walked so easily. The land looked the same. That unsettled me. I expected something to shift, to acknowledge me, to respond. It didn't. For the first time since the announcement, doubt crept in. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a whisper that slid under my ribs and stayed there. Ilara didn't fight for this. She didn't posture, didn't overperform, didn't need permission. She belonged. And suddenly, I understood the cruelest truth of all. I hadn't replaced Ilara. I'd exposed the absence she left behind. Winning, it turned out, didn't look like triumph. It looked like standing in someone else's shadow and realizing the light was never aimed at you. Chapter 5. His wolf never chose me. I learned there was a problem the night Julian's wolf refused to settle. It wasn't dramatic. No howling, no shattered furniture. Just a restlessness that sank into the walls and stayed there, vibrating through the floors like an unanswered question. Julian paced, back and forth, window to door to window. I lay on the bed, watching him trace the same path over and over, pretending the tightness in my chest was irritation instead of fear. Do you want to talk about it? I asked finally. No, he snapped. Then, a beat later, tighter, quieter, I don't know what's wrong. That was new. Julian always knew what was wrong. Or at least, he always knew who to blame. His wolf pressed against the edges of the bond that should have been forming, testing it, rejecting it like a poorly fitted collar. I could feel it, not directly, but in the way Julian's temper flared and fell without pattern, in the way his sleep turned shallow and sharp, in the way he stopped touching me unless he was awake and alert, like intimacy required supervision. Dry humor has a way of sneaking in when panic gets too loud. Congratulations, Maris, I thought one night as he pulled away from me with a frustrated growl. You married the man. The wolf returned him. Rituals didn't help. We tried grounding rites, scent binding ceremonies, old traditions Julian dismissed publicly but clung to privately when control slipped. Nothing held. His wolf refused to anchor. I asked an elder, carefully, casually, like I didn't already know the answer. Some wolves, she said, avoiding my eyes, recognize bonds differently. That was elder language for, this isn't working. Julian grew sharper after that. Not cruel, never that. Just distant. Like every interaction required effort he resented having to spend. I overcompensated. I planned gatherings, memorized pack lineages, learned which elders preferred firmness and which folded under charm. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny and bit my tongue when Julian dismissed me in public. I told myself this was what Ilara had done. But it wasn't. Ilara hadn't swallowed herself to fit beside him. She'd balanced him. And balance, it turns out, can't be faked. One night, after Julian stormed out to take a run alone, his wolf agitated enough to need distance, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally admitted the thought I'd been dodging for weeks. His wolf never chose me. That didn't mean Julian didn't want me. It meant something older, something deeper, had made a different decision long before I ever smiled in that hall. I laughed quietly to myself, the sound brittle in the empty room. Of course, I muttered. Even the wolf has opinions. The pack noticed. Wolves always do. The guards began rotating more often near Julian. Betas hesitated before approaching him. A few elders stopped seeking my input altogether. Not hostile, just cautious, as if they were waiting for something to declare itself. The rumors started softly. She's trying too hard. He hasn't settled. The land hasn't responded. The last one chilled me, because land doesn't lie. I dreamed of Ilara that night. She wasn't angry. That would have been easier. She stood at the edge of a forest I didn't recognize, calm and composed, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Behind her, something vast and silver-eyed waited patiently. I woke with my heart racing and the taste of iron in my mouth. Julian came back just before dawn, clothes damp, jaw clenched, eyes distant. She's gone, he said suddenly. I knew who he meant. Good, I replied too quickly. She made her choice. Julian stared at me then, really stared. And for the first time since the announcement, I saw it flicker across his face. Not desire, not admiration. Loss. He turned away without another word. I lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling as the truth settled in, slow and suffocating. I hadn't taken Ilara's place. I'd taken her absence. And absence, unlike people, doesn't adjust. It just echoes. That was the night I stopped believing this was a phase. Because you can convince a man of many things, but you can't lie to a wolf. And his had already decided I was not home. Chapter 6. The name that replaced mine. The letter arrived on heavy paper. That should have been my first clue. Council correspondence usually came thin and efficient, meant to be read, acted on, discarded. This one had weight, texture, the kind of paper that implied permanence. Julian opened it at the long table in the council room, fingers already impatient, already annoyed that something had dared to interrupt his morning. I watched his face change. Not dramatically. Julian never gave emotions that kind of stage. His jaw tightened. His shoulders went rigid. His wolf, restless even at rest, went suddenly, violently still. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. He read the first line again, then a second time. And when he finally looked up, his eyes weren't angry. They were offended. "They're requesting a joint council session," he said flatly. "With who?" I asked, though something in my chest had already started to sink. Julian folded the letter once, slowly, precisely. Frostbound. The name landed like a dropped glass. I kept my voice even. And they addressed it to her. The silence that followed felt surgical, clean, exact, like something had been cut out of the room. "Addressed how?" I asked. Julian unfolded the letter again, as if the words might rearrange themselves if he stared long enough. "Luna Alara of Frostbound Territory," he read. He didn't shout. He didn't swear. He just sat there, staring at the ink, like it had personally betrayed him. I felt something twist in my stomach, not jealousy exactly, but displacement, like furniture being moved in a room I thought was mine. I cleared my throat. "That title hasn't been formally— It doesn't need to be," Julian snapped. "Titles follow power, not announcements." There it was. The truth he hadn't wanted to say out loud. I reached for the letter. He didn't stop me. The name looked different when I read it myself. Heavier. Earned. Final. Luna Alara of Frostbound. Not former, not displaced, not rejected. Luna. I laughed before I could stop myself. It slipped out, short, sharp, wrong. "Well," I said, forcing lightness where it didn't belong. "I suppose fate has a sense of humor." Julian's gaze snapped to me, cold and sharp. "Don't." The word cracked. I raised my hand slightly. "I'm just saying, this doesn't mean anything. Titles get handed out all the time for political leverage." His wolf surged then, an invisible pressure in the room that made my skin prickle. "She didn't earn that," he said, voice low. "She didn't fight for it." I swallowed. "No," I said carefully. "She survived for it." That was a mistake. Julian stood so abruptly, his chair scraped against stone. "You don't know what you're talking about." I held my ground. I lived beside her for years. I watched her hold you together when no one else would. His hands curled into fists. "She held me back," he shot back. "She made me smaller." The words hung there, ugly and familiar. I wondered how many times Alara had heard them without ever realizing it. "Then why?" I asked quietly. "Does it feel like she's the one moving forward?" Julian turned away. That answer told me everything. The council session loomed over the next days like a gathering storm. Elders whispered. Guards stiffened. Betas watched Julian with an unease they hadn't bothered hiding before. And through it all, Ilara's name kept surfacing, not as gossip, not as pity, as reference, as authority. I started noticing how often people compared, never aloud, never directly, but always in pauses, in hesitations. Ilara would have known how to handle this. Ilara would have anticipated the fallout. Ilara would have softened the room. I hated myself for thinking that, because every comparison reminded me of the truth I was trying not to face. I didn't replace Ilara. I revealed how much the pack had relied on her without admitting it. That night, Julian didn't come to bed. I found him in the courtyard, staring at the mountains, hands braced against the stone railing like he was holding himself upright by force alone. "She didn't even say goodbye," he muttered. I stood beside him, the cold biting through my sleeves. You didn't give her the chance. He flinched. For the first time, I saw something crack in him. Not regret exactly, but realization. She was supposed to need us, he said. Us. The word felt new, fragile. I looked out at the darkened territory, imagining Alara somewhere else, somewhere steadier, stronger, untouched by this unraveling. She didn't, I replied softly. She needed herself. Julian didn't answer, but his wolf stirred, uneasy, restless, grieving something it had already lost. And in that moment, standing beside the man I'd chosen, I understood the cruel symmetry of it all. Ilara had been replaced in name only. In every way that mattered, she had replaced us. Chapter 7. Seeing her again. I thought I was prepared. That's the lie I told myself on the morning of the regional summit, the one that gathered packs the way storms gather pressure. I dressed carefully again, neutral, polished. Nothing that begged for attention. Everything that demanded it. Julian was already armored in composure when we arrived. He wore authority like a second skin, though it didn't sit as naturally as it used to. His wolf pressed uneasily against the inside of his ribs. I could feel it in the way his steps measured the ground, the way his gaze swept for exits before allies. We took our places among the delegates, and then the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that the air leaned in a different direction. She entered without announcement. Ilara. No, Luna Ilara, of Frostbound. The title wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The pack instincts did the work for her. Heads turned, postures adjusted, conversations softened into listening. She walked beside Cassian. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways, her triumphant, her bitter, her shattered, her vindictive. I'd prepared for anger, for accusation, for the sharp pleasure of being proven right about her fragility. What I wasn't prepared for was peace. Ilara looked settled, not glowing, not dramatic, just aligned, like something inside her had finally stopped bracing. Her spine was straight without effort, her eyes calm without distance. She wore authority the way she wore kindness once, quietly, without asking permission. Cassian stayed half a step behind her. That detail mattered. Not ownership, acknowledgement. Julian went rigid. I didn't need to look at him to know it. I felt the ripple of his wolf, confused, aching, angry in the way grief gets when it realizes it missed its chance. Ilara's gaze flicked across the room and landed on us. On me. For one suspended second, the world narrowed to the space between us. I waited for judgment, for bitterness, for that small, cutting smile that would have told me I'd been wrong to believe she could survive what we did to her. She inclined her head. Just that. Polite, controlled, complete. Then she looked away. It was devastating, because that gesture, so small, so correct, told me everything. She wasn't avoiding us. She simply didn't need us anymore. The summit began. Voices rose and fell. Territory disputes were outlined. Trade routes negotiated. The room bent toward Frostbound again and again, seeking Cassian's input, Ilara's confirmation. I watched the way elders deferred to her without thinking, the way Cassian waited, actually waited, when she spoke. Julian clenched his jaw so hard I thought his teeth might crack. At one point, an elder addressed Ilara directly. "Luna, do you concur?" She answered with measured clarity, her words efficient and precise. No performance, no embellishment. When she finished, the matter was settled. Just like that. Julian leaned toward me, voice tight. She's changed. Yes, I said softly. She has. He didn't hear the rest, and we didn't. During a break, I found myself standing alone near the edge of the hall, suddenly very aware of my hands, my posture, the way I occupied space like someone still auditioning. Ilara passed close enough that I caught her scent, clean, grounded, threaded with something stronger than hope, contentment. She paused, turned back. For a moment, it was just us. No audience, no power plays, no witnesses to rewrite the moment later. Maris, she said. My name sounded different in her mouth. Finished. Ilara, I replied. 1,000 things crowded my tongue. Apologies, justifications, explanations that would make me feel less monstrous. I said none of them. I hope you're well, she added. It wasn't a challenge. It was genuine. That hurt more than anger ever could. I am, I lied. She studied my face, not searching for weakness, not cataloging my sins, just observing. Good, she said. I'm glad. Then she stepped away. No confrontation, no closure, no absolution. Cassian rejoined her without a word, his presence settling around her like an unspoken promise. Together, they moved through the hall with quiet inevitability, leaving a wake of recalibration behind them. Julian didn't speak for the rest of the summit. On the journey home, the mountains pressed in on either side of us, dark and unyielding. I didn't think she'd look like that, he said finally. Like what? I asked. He hesitated. Untouched. I looked out the window, watching the road unwind ahead of us. That's because she wasn't, I said. She was transformed. He didn't respond. And in the silence that followed, the truth settled into me with cold clarity. I hadn't stolen Ilara's life. I had removed myself from it. And watching her now, whole, steady, unburdened, I understood the final unforgivable irony of my victory. She didn't lose anything. She shed us. And I was the one still carrying the weight. Chapter 8. The Marriage That Followed Me Like a Ghost. People assume that after the summit, things collapsed all at once. They didn't. They thinned. Slowly. Quietly. Like air leaking out of a room you don't realize you're suffocating in until you try to breathe deeply and can't. Julian married me 3 months later. Not because we were in love, because it made sense. That should have been my second warning. The first was the way he proposed, standing beside the fire pit one evening, hands clasped behind his back, like he was delivering terms, not a promise. This will stabilize things, he said. The pack needs consistency. I waited for something softer to follow. It didn't. I said yes anyway. Of course I did. I told myself love matures, that passion is unreliable, that stability is what adults choose when the thrill fades. That's the lie people tell when they don't want to admit they've already compromised too much to turn back. The ceremony was efficient, respectful, sparse. The pack attended, but they didn't celebrate. No laughter spilled into the corridors afterward. No sense of inevitability settled over the land. The territory didn't hum the way stories say it should when bonds align. Julian's wolf remained restless. Mine, if I was honest, never truly surfaced. Marriage didn't fix anything. It formalized the distance. Julian worked longer hours. He grew exacting, impatient with inefficiency, intolerant of dissent. When decisions went well, he took credit. When they didn't, he absorbed the frustration and let it leak into the room like a toxin. I learned to read the signs. The tension in his shoulders meant silence. The clipped answers meant compliance. The rare warmth meant opportunity, brief and conditional. We shared a bed, but not intimacy. Touch became functional. Conversation, transactional. Affection, something we performed in public and rationed in private. Dry humor crept in as a defense. At least we're consistent, I thought one night as he turned away from me again, already half asleep. We disappoint each other equally. The pack noticed. They always do. Elders stopped seeking my opinion unless Julian was present. Betas deferred to him with a careful distance, like men who'd learned not to expect warmth where it wasn't offered. And me? I became efficient. I handled logistics, smoothed appearances, absorbed the things Julian couldn't be bothered to notice anymore. I became good at it. Too good. That's when it hit me. Late, unwelcome, undeniable. I had become Ilara. Except without the love, without the trust, without the quiet respect she'd earned by simply being herself. Julian didn't thank me for it. He assumed it. One evening, after a council dispute that left tempers frayed, I suggested a compromise Ilara would have made instinctively. Julian cut me off mid-sentence. "I don't need you to manage me," he said sharply. The words landed with familiar cruelty. I stared at him, something brittle snapping into place inside my chest. "That's funny," I said, voice calm despite the ache. "Because that's exactly what you needed before." Silence followed. Dangerous silence. Julian's gaze hardened. "We're not discussing her." I nodded slowly. "No," I said, "we're not." Because we didn't need to. She was everywhere. In the way the land resisted him now. In the way council decisions stalled. In the way his wolf paced at night, unable to settle. In the way he flinched whenever Frostbound was mentioned, even casually. Ilara had become the absence that shaped everything. One night, unable to sleep, I stood alone on the balcony and watched the moon climb over the mountains. Somewhere beyond them, she was living a life that didn't include bracing for Julian's moods or shrinking to make him feel larger. The realization didn't come with rage. It came with exhaustion. I pressed my forehead to the cold stone and laughed softly. "Of course," I whispered to the empty air. "This is what winning looks like." Julian joined me minutes later, standing close without touching. "She's changed the balance," he said quietly. "Frostbound's influence is growing." I didn't respond. He glanced at me. "Say something." I turned to face him, really face him. And for the first time since the announcement, I told the truth without dressing it up. "She didn't change the balance," I said. "She revealed it." His jaw tightened. "You're defending her." "No," I replied. "I'm acknowledging reality." He looked away. That was our marriage in miniature. Truth offered, rejected, left to echo. As the night deepened, One certainty settled in my bones, heavy and undeniable. I hadn't married a man. I'd married a ghost. And the woman who haunted our union wasn't Ilara. It was the version of myself who believed that being chosen was the same as being wanted. That woman was gone now. What remained was me, still standing, still smiling when required, but no longer confused about what this life actually was. And for the first time since I smiled in that hall, I stopped pretending the smile meant victory. Chapter 9. The Truth I Never Wanted. There is a moment, quiet, unceremonious, when self-deception runs out of places to hide. For me, it happened on an ordinary afternoon. No counsel, no confrontation, no dramatic betrayal unfolding in front of witnesses, just a ledger. I was reviewing territory allocations, fingers moving automatically over numbers and notes, when I realized I'd annotated the margins the same way Ilara used to. Clear, efficient, anticipating problems before they became arguments. The thought landed gently. Then it stayed. I closed the book. The room felt too still, like it was waiting for me to finish a sentence I'd been avoiding for years. I hadn't wanted Julian. Not really. I'd wanted what he represented. That truth settled into me slowly, like something dissolving in water, impossible to separate once it's fully mixed. Julian was power, visibility, a seat at the center of the room. He was the promise that if I stood beside him, I wouldn't have to explain my worth anymore. But I hadn't loved him the way stories insist love must look. I loved the way he noticed me. The way choosing me felt like proof that I wasn't second, wasn't overlooked, wasn't destined to be the friend standing just out of frame. I loved being chosen. And I hated myself for how long it took to admit that. The shame didn't come roaring in. It crept. Quiet. Familiar. I thought back to Ilara, how she moved through the world without demanding witness, how her strength didn't ask to be affirmed every time she entered a room. I used to think that made her weak. I understand now how wrong I was. Julian never loved Ilara for her softness. He loved her for her utility. And I didn't love Julian for his dominance. I loved him for the way standing beside him made me visible. We were both using each other. The difference was that Ilara had been collateral. The memory of the pack hall rose unbidden. Her standing there, the applause, the way I'd smiled like I belonged to the moment instead of the crime. I pressed my hand to my chest, breath catching. I hadn't stolen Julian. I had stepped into a vacancy created by his ambition. And the most unforgivable part? I hadn't cared who got displaced, as long as it wasn't me. That truth burned cleaner than guilt. It didn't excuse me. It didn't absolve me. It simply clarified. I thought of Ilara again, not as she was when she stood beside Julian, but as she was at the summit. Grounded, certain, unburdened. She hadn't been broken by us. She'd been released. I laughed then, quietly, the sound thin but honest. "Of course," I murmured. "That's how it works." Julian came in later, distracted, already mid-thought. He didn't notice my expression, didn't ask what I'd been doing. He never did. "We need to address the eastern border issue," he said. "The council is pushing back." I looked at him, really looked. At the man I'd wanted to be chosen by. At the authority I'd thought would save me from invisibility. And for the first time, I saw him without hunger or hope clouding the edges. Just a man who mistook control for certainty. "I'll handle it," I said automatically. Then I stopped myself. "No," I corrected. "You will." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm done compensating," I replied calmly. "For you? For this?" Silence fell between us. Julian studied me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "You're being difficult." I smiled, small, real, unpracticed. "No," I said. "I'm being honest." He turned away, already dismissing the moment, already assuming I'd fall back into line. I didn't. That night, lying awake beside him, listening to the familiar restlessness of his wolf, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, not forgiveness. Clarity. I knew what I had done. I knew why. And I knew something else, too. Something far more unsettling than guilt. If I had the choice again, knowing everything I knew now, I might still make it. Not because it was right, but because it revealed me. Some betrayals don't ruin lives. They strip away illusions. And when the illusion is gone, all that's left is the truth. Bare, uncomfortable, impossible to unknow. I didn't like what I saw. But at least now, I could stop pretending I was someone else. The woman who smiled when she won was gone. What remained was a woman who finally understood the cost and knew she would be paying it for the rest of her life. Chapter 10. What I lost when I won. Loss doesn't always announce itself with fire. Sometimes it arrives quietly, sits down beside you, and waits for you to notice there's less room to breathe. By the time the council formally recognized Frostbound's new standing, I already knew what the decision would be. Power follows momentum. It always has. And whatever momentum Julian once carried had bled out, slowly, unnoticed by everyone except those of us living inside the consequences. The notice came without ceremony. No insults, no blame. Just facts, arranged politely on official parchment. Frostbound's borders expanded. Trade routes shifted. Council influence recalibrated. And at the bottom of the page, a single line that felt heavier than all the rest. Vale Ridge acknowledges Luna Ilara of Frostbound as independent authority. Independent. Not attached to Julian. Not defined by rejection. Not footnoted as a loss. I folded the letter carefully and set it aside, hands steady in a way they hadn't been months ago. Julian didn't ask to read it. That told me everything. He had begun to understand something essential about power. That once it moves away from you, chasing it only makes the distance obvious. The pack changed, too. Not dramatically, not rebelliously, just selectively. Elders stopped seeking Julian's counsel unless required. Guards rotated assignments without explanation. Invitations arrived later. Sometimes not at all. Julian noticed. He grew sharper, quieter, more contained. Not humbled, never that, but narrower, like a man conserving strength for battles no one else planned to fight anymore. And me? I became invisible again. Not the way I'd been before, eager, overlooked, waiting to be chosen. This was a different kind of invisibility. Earned. People assumed I was fine because I didn't complain. Because I didn't rage or break or make scenes worthy of gossip. They mistook composure for comfort. One evening, I walked the perimeter alone, the mountains dark against the sky, the wind sharp enough to clear my thoughts. Somewhere beyond those peaks, Ilara was living a life that didn't require bracing for disappointment or translating another person's anger into something survivable. I wondered, briefly, if she ever thought of me. Not with longing, not with bitterness, just as a closed chapter. The thought didn't hurt the way it once might have, because I understood now what she had gained and what I had lost. I lost ease. I lost trust that wasn't conditional. I lost the ability to tell myself I was misunderstood rather than complicit. Julian joined me partway through the walk, hands tucked into his coat, expression unreadable. "They won't challenge Frostbound again," he said. Not openly. "No," I agreed. "They don't need to." He glanced at me. "Do you regret it?" The question surprised me, not because it was asked, but because it was the first honest one he'd offered in a long time. I considered it.
Regret is a luxury. It assumes the past could have been navigated cleanly, that desire could have been neatly redirected, that wanting less would have made me more. "I regret pretending I didn't know what I was doing," I said finally. Julian nodded once, accepting the answer without understanding it. We stood there in silence, two people bound by a choice that had already outlived its justification. Later, alone in our quarters, I caught my reflection in the mirror and studied it. Not critically, not kindly, honestly. I wasn't redeemed. I wasn't ruined. I was informed. And that, I realized, was the true cost of winning the way I had. Ignorance would have been easier, but clarity has a permanence all its own. I turned away from the mirror and extinguished the lights, letting the room settle into shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, faint, unanchored, unanswered. For the first time, I didn't flinch. Because I understood now. Ilara didn't take anything from me. She took what never belonged to me in the first place. And what I lost when I won was the ability to pretend otherwise. Epilogue. The smile I don't wear anymore. Time doesn't soften things the way people promise. It clarifies. Years later, because it is years now, I walk the same mountain paths without expecting them to answer me. The land never learned my name the way it learned Ilara's. I've stopped waiting for it to. Julian rules what remains of Vale Ridge with precision, not warmth, not vision, precision. The pack endures him the way stone endures weather, by wearing down slowly, imperceptibly. We share a life that functions. We share nothing else. I've learned how to exist without applause. That was harder than losing it. I still do the work. I still keep things running. I still show up where I'm needed and disappear where I'm not. There's a quiet competence in that, one I recognize now because I finally understand who taught it to me. Sometimes, at councils or summits, I hear her name. Not whispered, not explained. Referenced. Luna Ilara advised, Frostbound's position is, Ilara's protocol has proven effective. I don't flinch anymore. I don't compare. I don't imagine alternate versions of myself standing where she stands. I know now that those versions were never real. They were costumes stitched from hunger and impatience. Once, only once, I saw her again at a distance. No confrontation, no conversation, just a passing moment where the world aligned and then moved on. She didn't look back. I took that as a gift,
Because closure, I've learned, is overrated. Understanding lasts longer. I don't tell this story to absolve myself. I don't expect forgiveness, hers or yours. Some choices don't ask to be redeemed. They ask to be acknowledged. I smiled when I won. I don't wear that smile anymore. What I wear now is quieter, truer, uncomfortable in the way honesty always is. And if there's a lesson buried in all of this, it's not about betrayal or fate or even love. It's this. Being chosen can feel like salvation until you realize you chose it for the wrong reasons. If this story made you uncomfortable in the best way, if you've ever questioned what it really means to win, consider subscribing to Rene's Romance Stories for more emotionally complex paranormal romance, where fate doesn't rescue quietly and consequences matter. And if you have thoughts, hard ones, honest ones, share them in the comments. Stories like this deserve conversation.